So now we are going to do work at the whiteboard, and I'm going to show you how to fill in rests, and we're going to talk about everything we just talked about at the piano, but actually we are going to see it here. However, before we even start looking closely at time signatures and filling out rests, we have to, just as a review for some of you, go over some strange notation figures that may confuse you when you're actually doing your homework. So for some of you, you might already know this, but for those of you who are in line with the RCM's curriculum, these are new concepts. So we're just going to go over them quickly, and then we will get to the serious analysis of meter and filling out rests and stuff like that, and groupings. So first let's just look at these figures. So on this side of the board I've written out a bunch of tuplet figures, and on this side of the board I've written out a bunch of dotted figures. Now, we can't get these confused. There's a lot of 3 groupings around this, but they're very different, so I want to go over what they are. So, we have all sorts of tuplets in music. There are quintuplets, there are duplets, there are triplets, septuplets, stuff like that. For this course, all you need to know is triplets, and luckily triplets are the easiest one to figure out their note value, because there actually is an integrated pattern with all of them, and I'm going to show you what that is now. So, here's how to figure out the note value that is equal to the triplet you are looking at. Ready? The note value of the triplet that you are looking at, of which it is equal to, is one note value higher than what the triplet is built out of. How do I say that in an easier manner? Whatever triplet you're looking at, the note value of which it's constructed, all you have to do is go up one note value higher and choose one of those, and that's what it is equal to. It will make more sense when I show it to you on the board. So, the first one is a 16th note triplet. What is this made up of? 16th notes. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what is this equal to? How long is this actual figure? And the answer is, you have to ask yourself, what is one note value greater than a 16th note? Or what is one rhythmic value greater than a 16th note? And the answer is an 8th note. An 8th note is the next note value higher than a 16th note. You take one of those, and that's what this triplet figure is equal to. So a triplet 16th is equal to 1/8 note. Okay? So we asked ourselves, what is this made up of? It's made of 16th note. It's made up of 16th notes. What's one greater than a 16th note? An 8th note. Therefore, the 16th note triplet is worth 1/8 note. Let's do the next one. What is this triplet figure made up of? This is an 8th note triplet figure. Then we step back and we ask ourselves, what is the next note value up from an 8th note? And the answer is, obviously, a quarter note. Therefore, this triplet note figure, made of 8th notes, is worth 1/4 note. Okay? Here's a quarter note triplet figure. It's made up of quarter notes, so we ask ourselves, what is one note value greater than a quarter note? And the answer is a half note. Therefore, a triplet quarter note figure is worth a half note. 1/2 note. Now down here, we have triplets made up of 3 half notes. We ask ourselves, what is one note value greater than a half note? And the answer is a whole note. Therefore, this triplet figure made up of half notes is worth 1 whole note. These are the triplet figures you will most likely see if you're going to take a grade 5 or a level 5 RCM exam. However, there's one more in the book that's very rare, and I wouldn't tell you I wouldn't even bother showing you what it was, except that there's a vague reference to it in the textbook, so I might as well go over it, although you're very much not likely to see this triplet whole note figure on an exam, but we will show you what it is. So, this is a triplet whole note figure. Now, we ask ourselves the same thing: what's one note value greater than a whole note? And now some of you are thinking, there is no note value greater than a whole note. So what do I write? Actually, believe it or not, there is one more symbol that represents two whole notes. It's called a breve, and it looks something like this. It's also known as a double whole note. It looks something like this. You write a whole note, and then you write two lines beside it, and that is actually worth 8 quarter notes. Another way of writing it is something like this. You write a rectangle instead. So that is called a breve, or a double whole note, and believe it or not, that is one note value greater than a whole note. If you're a pianist, which I assume most of you are, we almost never see this in piano music. If you're an early musician, you might have seen this more often if you're singing Palestrina or Renaissance choral music or stuff like that. But generally speaking, you won't come across this on your theory exam. You probably won't, but it's in the textbook, so I showed you anyways, just in case. So there's a small chart of triplets, just to review. A triplet is equal to one note that is of the next greater note value to what you're actually looking at. So 16th note triplet is worth an 8th note note triplet is worth a quarter note triplet is worth a half note triplet is worth a whole note, and a whole note triplet is worth a TIE fighter from Star Wars. And if you haven't seen Star Wars, don't bother, because Disney ruined it. It's too late for you. Okay, so now let's look at dotted notes. What is a dot? Listen, a dot is equal to half of whatever came before it. I'll say that one more time. A dot represents half the note value of whatever came immediately before it. Let's look more closely at what I mean by that. We will start out with this dotted whole note. So, I know if you cut a whole note in half, you get 2 half notes. As such. So there are 2 half notes in this whole note. So this is worth 4 beats, and this dot is worth half of whatever came before it, and what came before it was a whole note. So this dot, right now, is equal to half a whole note, and half of a whole note is a half note, obviously. Therefore, what we're looking at actually is 3 half notes compressed together in one symbol. So this is actually equal. The timing of this symbol is actually equal to 3 half notes that have been tied together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 4 quarter notes in there. So a dot is half of whatever came before it. In this case, this dot is worth a half note. Let's look at this symbol. I'll say it again. A dot is half of whatever came before it. So in this case, let's figure out what half of an 8th note is. Half of an 8th note is a 16th note. So there are 2 16th notes in this 1/8 note. There they are. I wrote them down so you can see. And since this dot is half of whatever came before it, this dot represents 1 16th note. So what we're actually looking at here is a figure that has 3 16th notes compressed or smushed inside of it. So the note values, you're actually holding this for a length of 3 16th notes when you are playing your instrument, which might sound like 3 16th notes tied together. Dot is half of whatever came before it. Half of an 8th note is a 16th note. Now let's do this one. A quarter note figure. A dotted quarter note. Same thing, a dot is half of whatever came before it. Half of a quarter note is an 8th note, because 2 8th notes make up a quarter note. Here's 2 8th notes here, just so we can see. So these 2 8th notes are in that quarter note, and then the dot is an extra 8th note, which is half of that. So what we're actually looking at here are 3 8th notes tied together in one symbol. And you can see why these are important, right? If you're playing your instrument or playing music, this is a ridiculously hard thing to read and count. It's much easier to have dotted figures and just know what they are rather than having to write ties everywhere. And the last one we'll look at for today is a dotted half note. One more time, a dot is half of whatever came before it. So half of a half note is a quarter note. So we see beside, I would draw 2 quarter notes. Now this dot is worth 1 quarter note because that's half of that. So what we're actually looking at here are 3 quarter notes tied together. There's a lot of 3s on this board. 3 half notes, 3 sixteenths, 3 eighths, 3 quarters. And over here there's more 3s. 3 sixteenths, 3 eighths, 3 quarter notes, 3 half notes. But they're very different. These things operate in very different ways. This is a subdivision of a beat we know. This is usually a subdivision of a main group or a main beat within the meter you're working with. And this is usually an easier way of writing ties or grouping together notes for their note value that is easier for the musician to read. So don't get these two things confused. Okay, good. We reviewed, so now we can actually look at meter. So let's figure out what these numbers actually mean, what the numbers in a time signature or meter actually represent. The top number of the meter usually represents how many beats are in each bar, and the bottom number usually represents what note gets the beat. Okay, what type of note gets the beat. So we'll start in this column here, 2/8. If you have a piece of music that has a 2/8 time signature, that means that there are 2 eighth notes in each bar. Okay? So one bar of music has 2 eighth notes in it. 2/4 means that there are 2 quarter notes in each bar. A 4 represents a quarter note. So 2 quarter notes. 2/2 means that there are 2 half notes in each bar. So each one of these time signatures has 2 pulses in it. Strong, weak. So the first one would be strong, weak. Strong, weak, strong, weak. Strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. Okay, so from the audience's perspective, these meters might all sound the same because essentially they're in 2, but for the musician reading them, the note value is different. So how can we subdivide 2/8 further? Let's see. So 2 16th notes go into 1 8th note. So if you want to subdivide that one level further, you could do that. If we subdivide this one level further, we get 2 eighth notes. And down here, if we broke those in half, we would get 2 quarter notes for each beat. That's the first level of subdivision. So 2/8 would be 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. This would be 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So again, they sound all the same, but the notes, the rhythmic notation we've chosen to represent the pulse has changed. So that's the groupings for that column. Let's move over here to the 3s. So we have 3/8 time, 3/4 time, and 3/2 time. So the top numbers mean the same thing, and the bottom numbers mean the same thing. The top number, the 3 in this case, means the amount of beats in a measure, and the bottom note tells us which note is getting the beat. Okay, so 3/8, 3, there are 3 eighth notes in each bar. So 3 eighth notes, 3 quarter notes, 3/4 means that there are 3 quarter notes in each bar, and 3/2, 3 half notes in each bar. Okay, and the beat emphasis for all of these is the same. Strong, weak, weak. Strong, weak, weak. Strong, weak, weak. So that would be strong, weak, weak, strong. That's how that would be emphasized if you're performing these measures. And we'll subdivide one level further for fun. So, one level of subdivision further, if you break all of these 8s into 16ths, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, strong, weak, weak. If we can subdivide these into 8th notes. So that'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and then if we are subdividing 3, 2, that would be broken up into quarter notes. One and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So that's this column, and the last column is 4, 8, 4, 4, and 4, 2. Same thing. Top number represents the amount of beats, and the bottom note represents the type of note that gets the beat. So in the case of 4, 8 time, there are 4 eighth notes in every measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 4 time, there are 4 quarter notes in every measure. 1 quarter note, 2 quarter note, 3 quarter note, 4. For 2 represents a half note, there are 4 half notes in every bar. I messed up that half note. One half note, 2 half note, 3 half note, 4 half notes. Okay? And the beat emphasis for 4, 8 time is strong, weak, medium, weak. 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 Strong, weak, medium. Okay, and if we subdivide that further, we can break it down into some of the groups we may be using on the fill in the rest questions. If you break up 8th notes, you get 16th notes. And then if you break up quarter notes, you get 8th notes. And of course, if we break up half notes, we get quarter notes. So this would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and strong, weak, medium, weak. Same thing, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and strong, weak, medium, weak. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay. So there is all the groupings and kind of a closer look at the meters we're using. Now notice when I count. Let's take this column for a second. This is not that important for your theory exam, but it's important if you're a performer. So when I'm counting these, you notice the numbers didn't change. This, if I'm subdividing, I'm counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if I'm a pianist, so if I'm playing the piano and I'm playing and I'm counting it loud, it'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Beat 1 is strong, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I would be saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and in 4/8 time. If I was in 4/4 time, I would also be saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if I was in 4/2 time, I would also be saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Some people find that confusing because here I'm saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but I'm counting 16th notes. Here I'm saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but I'm counting 8th notes. And down here I'm saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but I'm counting quarter notes. So this number, the way I count when I'm performing, depends on the top number, not the bottom number. Okay? So we get our counting patterns when we're practicing and we're counting out loud. If your teacher asks you to count out loud, your counting pattern depends on the top number, not the bottom number. Okay? So even though the note values have changed, if I'm performing, so going 1, 2, 3, 4, strong, weak, medium, weak, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The beat emphasis stays the same. Okay, that is 90% of the meters you need to know. The only one I didn't include on this board is 6/8 time, and I'm going to show you that one later. And now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for, how to fill in rests. Here we go. I'm going to draw a bunch of diagrams, and it might help you to find a white piece of paper right now and draw them with me so that you don't forget in a notebook or something. So, we learned about meters that are grouped into 2 beats, 3 beats, and 4 beats. And in this course, when we're subdividing things, we are going to be subdividing into 2 things, 3 things, or 4 things. So I'm going to make diagrams with 2s, 3s, and 4s. So here's a group of 2 things. There's 2 black dots. And here's these 3 black dots represent a group of 3 things, and over here I will draw 4 black dots for when we are working with a group of 4 anythings, whether it's 4 note values in a subdivision or a meter that is split into 4 pulses. So, ready? Here we go. When filling out rests in a group of 4 things, whenever you have 4 things in a meter, 4 subdivisions or 4 groupings, you can attach the front 2 in a rest, you can attach the back 2 in a rest, you can attach the whole thing into one gigantic rest, but you cannot attach the middle 2. So, when you have a group of 4 things, these 2 can be attached together in a rest, these 2 can be attached in a rest, all 4 of them can be attached together in a rest, but in between where my head is, in between my 2 hands, you cannot attach the rests there. Okay? And we will practice that and it will become clear in time, but for now, just copy down that diagram. Now let's think about groups of 3 things. Doesn't matter, 3 subdivisions or 3 groups within a meter. Here's the rules. You can attach the front 2 pulses into a group, into one rest. You can attach the entire bar or the entire group of 3 things into one rest, but you cannot attach the back 2 in a group of 3 things. So you have 3 things in front of you, whether it's the big group in the meter or you've subdivided and you've ended up with a group of 3 things. You can attach the front 2 together in a rest, you can attach all of them together in a rest, but you cannot attach the back 2. Why? Because it's hard for the musician to read, again. And a group of 2 is the easiest. You can group 2 together. If you have a group of 2 things, whether it's a beat that's been subdivided into 2s or it's just 2 groups in a meter, you can attach it all together in one rest. You're probably wondering what I'm talking about. I will now show you. Let's do something in the easiest meter. Let's do 4/4 time, because we all play music in 4/4 time all the time. I will just make up a question that you might get on your exam right now. So you might get a question on your exam that looks something like this. So the question will say, here's a bar of 4/4, there's 1/16th note at the beginning, there's 1/16th note at the end, and we need you to fill in the rests here. So here's how we do it. Step 1 is to write the groupings of the meter underneath the question, in the blank space underneath the question, so that you can see and keep track of what you're actually doing. So let's do that right now. The grouping for 4/4 time, there are 4 quarter notes in this bar. 1 quarter note, 2 quarter notes, 3 quarter notes, 4 quarter notes. Now, step 2 is to finish the outer groupings first, okay? So we need to finish this grouping first and that grouping first. Don't worry about the middle. Whenever we're doing these questions, we always work from the outsides in, okay? So it doesn't matter whether it's this group first or that group first, as long as we're going outside in. Let's start with this group first. We need to add rests here to finish this first pulse in 4/4 time. We have a 16th note. To make this easy, I know that I'm going to write 16th notes down here. I'm going to subdivide my grouping diagram beneath the question into 16th notes, so it's easy for me to see what on earth I am doing. So I know that there are 4 16th notes in this 1 quarter note. So here's a 16th note, there's a 16th note. 1/16th note has already been taken care of. I don't have to worry about this 16th note. Now to finish this group, there are 3 16th notes left over. Now, how many 16th notes are there? There was 1, 2, 3, 4. Before I crossed that out, there was 4. So I need to look at my diagram when dealing with a subdivision of 4 things. I can attach the front 2, the back 2, the whole thing, or not the middle 2. So let's do this now. I'm working with the 2 back 16th notes and 1 of the ones from the front. I can't attach the middle 2, so these 2 16th notes cannot be put together in one rest. They cannot be combined in one rest. So I have to put this one up here on its own, like this. There's 1/16th rest for that 1/16th note. It's crossed off. Now I have 2 left over. I look at my diagram and I notice I am allowed to attach the back 2 in a group of 4. So I can combine these 2, and you should combine them because it's easy for the musician to read. So 2 16th notes when combined into a rest equal an 8th rest. And then I cross them off, and then I can cross this off. That is the first group. Just as an aside, there were 3 16th notes here. A lot of students put this. That's the wrong answer. And this is the wrong answer because it combines the middle 2. Okay, so if you were watching me do that and you thought, why didn't I just put a dotted 8th? You cannot combine the middle 2. That's why. That's wrong. Okay? We've done 1 outer group. We can't go here yet because we haven't finished step 2, which said we have to finish the outer groups first. So now we're working with this other group because it's on the outside. We work on the outsides in. Now let's finish this one. Let's do the same thing, and to make it easy on our eyes, I'm going to subdivide this into 16th notes. Because I was given a 16th note in the question, I'm going to subdivide my quarter note into 4 16ths, so it's easy for me to see what on earth I am doing. Okay, so I know there are 4 16th notes in a quarter note. 1 has been taken care of already, and I know that I'm dealing with a group of 4 things, so my eyes are going to be looking at my 4 at my diagram with my diagram that tells me about how you attach 4 things. Okay, so 1 is gone. Now I have 3 left over. Now, can I attach these 3 things together? No, because if you look at the diagram, the middle 2 cannot be attached together. So I cannot combine these 2 within the rest. So this one has to be put on its own. So I'll use a 16th rest there to get rid of that 16th. I have 2 left over. They're the front 2 in the grouping. I look at my diagram. I notice that I can actually combine the front 2 in a group of 4. I can combine those, and if I take these 2 16ths and combine them into one rest, I get an 8th rest, and there it is. Cross off, cross off. This group is done. Hooray for me. So that's the end of step 2. I finished the outer groups first, and I did that. I had to subdivide into groups of 4, and I made sure to never attach the middle 2. So we were working with groups of 4 on a really tiny microscopic level. Now we zoom out and we once again are dealing with a group of 4 things. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to now fill in the middle 2. We have 2 quarter notes left over. They happen to be the middle 2 in a group of 4, and again, we cannot attach the middle 2 in a group of 4. Ay, 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 ay. So, what are we going to do? There's 2 possibilities. There's one possibility, but I'm going to show you what students who aren't paying attention would do. Students who weren't paying attention to their diagram would just do this. They would write in a half rest for these 2 quarter notes. That's not right because it combines them and they are in the middle. So that's also wrong. In order to do this, we cannot combine them, we just have to put them on their own. They just have to be by themselves, they cannot be combined. So, one rest that represents a quarter note is a quarter rest, obviously. We'll cross it off. And one rest that represents this quarter note is again a quarter rest. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the answer to. Let's continue to fill in rests, and this time let's use a diagram that represents 2 things. So in this case, let's do 3, 2, or we'll do 2, 2 time. Cut time. Okay, so let's say we have a question on the exam, and we have to fill in the rest in a bar of 2, 2. I will put a quarter note here, and I'll put a difficult 16th note triplet over here, so we learn how to deal with that thing. And here's our bracket, so we have to fill in the rests here, and we are going to be using diagrams up here to do that. So, first, step 1 when filling in rest is to write the groupings underneath. So the groupings for 2, 2 time, there are 2 half notes. So underneath here we have to write 2 half notes. Here's 1 half note, 2 half notes. Okay, so there are 2 groups in this meter. Step 2 is to finish the outer groups first. There are no inner groups in this meter, so we're just going to fill from the outside in, just with normal, and there's nothing in the middle, so that doesn't matter too much. Let's start with this side, because this is scaring me, so we'll start with the easy side first to try and get some marks. So I will subdivide. I'm going to have to subdivide my diagram so it's easier to see. So I know we have a quarter note here, and I know that there are 2 quarter notes in this half note, so I'll draw them small up here so I can see properly. Okay, so now we have to finish this group. So lucky for me, there's already a quarter note there, so that can be crossed out. And there's 1 quarter note left over, therefore there's nothing to attach, we don't have to worry. In a group of 2 it doesn't matter, so we can just write 1 rest that represents this 1 quarter note up here, and the group will be done. So 1 rest that represents this quarter note is a quarter rest. and that group is done. That's an easy one. Now if we look over here, this is a little bit more difficult because we can't even start finishing this group until we know what this note value is. Now you remember when we're figuring out note values of triplets, a triplet is worth the note value one higher than what you're actually seeing. So we're seeing 16th notes here because it's a 16th note triplet. One note value higher than a 16th note is an 8th note. Therefore this triplet 16th is worth 1/8 note. Now I'm going to have to, in my diagram below the question, to make this easy to do, I'm going to have to subdivide this all the way up to the level of 8th notes so that I can properly see what I'm doing. So if we subdivide this on one layer, we get quarter notes. And then if you subdivide that again, if you subdivide the quarter notes, we figure out that we are working actually with 4/8 notes. So we've had to subdivide this 2 layers down. Okay, so we just figured out that this triplet 16th note is worth 1/8 note. So I can cross off 1/8 note. That's done. Now let's finish this subdivision. There's 1/8 note left over. In order to finish just this half of the group, I will put an 8th rest to get rid of that 1/8 note in my diagram. So there's an 8th rest that's crossed out. Now this is crossed out, so half of this group is done. Now over on this side, we have to finish the front half of that group. There's nothing here. Here's 2 things. I know that in my diagram of 2 things, it's okay to combine 2 things. That would mean I can combine these 2 8th notes into a rest that represents a quarter note. So a rest that represents a quarter note is a quarter rest. Cross out, cross out, cross out, cross out. I forgot to cross these out, and I'm done. There's an example of filling in rests in a meter that has 2 large groupings. Okay, for the last section of our whiteboard video, and to prove my worth as a theory teacher, I am going to show you how to write groupings in 3/4 versus 6/8 time. I've chosen these 2 meters because actually they're the same length. 3/4 time has 6/8 notes in it, and 6/8 time obviously has 6/8 notes in it. So in reality, they're the same length. But now that you know your groupings and your meters, you know that they're not the same meter because they're grouped differently. And in fact, on your exam, if you're doing a level 5 exam, 6/8 is the only compound meter you need to know. And a compound meter, again, is when you subdivide into groups of 3s rather than even numbers in simple meter. Let's do 3/4 first. I'm going to fill in the rests using our diagrams. Then I'm going to come over here and fill in the rest in a bar of 6/8, and you're going to see just how different they are despite being the same length. Okay, so step 1 to filling in a meter is to write the groupings underneath. So the grouping for 3/4 time, 3 quarter notes in each bar, is there's 3 groups, and each group is worth a quarter note. So there's 1 quarter note, 2 quarter notes, 3 quarter notes. All right. Step 2 is to fill in the outer groupings first. Work from the outside in. Let's start from this side. So over here, the question has given me a dotted 8th note. Remember, a dot is half of whatever comes before it, and half of an 8th note is a 16th note. So down below in my diagram, I think I should subdivide into 16th notes right away so that I can clearly see what I'm doing. So there are 4 16th notes in a quarter note. There they are. Now, how many 16ths are we actually looking at in the question? There's 1 16th note here, and there's 2 16th notes here. 1 plus 2 is 3. So we can already go ahead and cross off 3 of these 16th notes because they're already there. And in order to finish this grouping, I see there's only 1 16th left, and I can just put a 16th rest there to get rid of that. There's a 16th rest, gone. And this grouping is gone. We have to complete step 2 by finishing the outer groupings. This is the other outer grouping. So now we have to, again, we'll do this all over again. We'll figure out how many are the note value of a 16th note triplet. A triplet is worth 1 note value greater than what you're actually seeing. So this is, we see 16th notes. The note value greater than a 16th note is an 8th note. Therefore, this triplet 16th is actually worth 1 8th note. So I will just go ahead and subdivide this into 8th notes rather than 16ths. I don't need to work with 16ths for this group, for this subdivision over here. There's 2 8th notes in a quarter. That's worth 1 8th note. This is gone. Now we only have 1 left. And I can just go ahead and eliminate it by putting the rest that's equal to this. This is an 8th note, and an 8th note is equal to an 8th rest. That's gone. Cross out. And now we only have 1 group in the middle. There's nothing to attach, so we don't have to worry about our diagram problems. We can just put 1 rest for this whole group, and 1 rest for a quarter note is a quarter rest. There we go. That's the right answer. 3/4 time. That is how the groupings look. Now, here's the exact same, this is the exact same rhythm in a group of 6 8, but the groupings are different, and therefore the rest are going to look different. So now let's move over to the bar of 6 8. The grouping for 6 8 time is 2 groups of 3 8th notes. 2 groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. So, this is the diagram you would write underneath your question on your exam if you're doing a question of 6 8th notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the big layer, it's strong, weak. We're hearing 2s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the tinier layer, we're hearing strong, weak, weak. Strong, weak, weak. Those are supposed to be W's. Actually, this is going to be medium, weak, weak. Strong, weak, weak, medium, weak, weak. Strong, weak, weak, medium, weak, weak. So that's the grouping for 6 8. So, look over here. There are 2 8th notes in this, 2 8th notes in that quarter note, and 2 8th notes in that quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know why I counted to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 8th notes. So, there are 6 8th notes in here and 6 8th notes in there, but as you can see, because of the meter, they are grouped differently, and therefore our rests are going to look different. Let's go ahead and fill out the rests. So here again we have a dotted 8th note. I know a dot is half of whatever came before it, so a dot is half of an 8th note. Half of an 8th note is a 16th note. So I'm going to go ahead and subdivide this into 16th notes. So that is actually that. So that's already been taken care of. So I'm going to subdivide these first 2 8th notes into 16th notes, and I'll do it all for all 3 just to be clear. So I've subdivided this group into 3 pairs of 16th notes. Now let's eliminate what's already there. These 2 16th notes are already in the question because that's 8th note, so this is gone, which means this is gone. And now this is worth 1 16th note, so this 16th note is gone. And in order to finish this pulse of the group, we need to get rid of that 1 16th note, and we can do that with a 16th rest. So that's that group gone, and that is now gone. Now, we have 1 more 8th in order to finish our first group. Okay, and there's 2 16th notes. We didn't have to do this, but we will anyways. We subdivided it anyways. There's a group of 2 things. We know we can attach the whole thing, so that can be attached into an 8th to a 1/8 rest. So that's that. Now we're not even done the question, but look, compare back to the other bar. This is not the same thing. Okay, the different groupings in the meters has already changed the way we've applied our rests. Here there is a 1/16 rest, and then a quarter rest for this. Here, this is already different. This is an 1/8 rest, and we finished this whole group. Now let's work this way from the outside in for this last group. So, a 1/16 note triplet. A triplet is worth one note value greater than what you're seeing. A 1/16, one note value greater than a 1/16 note is an 1/8 note. So, this is worth 1/8 note. So we can go ahead and cross this off. 1/8 note has been taken care of us by the question. Now we have a group of 3 things. Let's look up here to our diagram when we're dealing with 3s. Can we attach these 2 together in one rest, or do we have to put one rest for each of those 1/8 notes? Can we put a quarter rest for both of them, or do we have to put 2 1/8 rests? Let's check and see. We are allowed to attach the front 2 in a group of 3, but not the back 2. These are the front 2. We are allowed to attach them, and 2 1/8 go into a quarter rest. Cross out, and that's the answer. So, here's a bar of 3, 4. It has 6 1/8 notes in it. Here's a bar of 6, 8. It has 6 1/8 notes in it. This is simple meter. This is compound meter. They are different because they are grouped differently. This one sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. This one sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We live in America. Hemiolas. The key component to doing these questions is knowing the groups for each meter so that you can actually write down the diagram underneath the question you are writing, and to know these by heart. Okay? So you have to know your diagrams by heart. You have to know that in a group of 4 you cannot attach the middle 2. You have to know that in a group of 3 you cannot attach the back 2. And you have to know in a group of 2 you can attach whatever, you can attach both of them, and you need to be able to know the diagrams that apply for each meter. For those of you who are older watching this video and are more advanced, if you look in the textbook, essentially what these diagrams mean is that you cannot attach a rest that begins with a pulse that's on a weak beat. Okay, so if you're an advanced student, you don't have to memorize these diagrams. You can just think, if the group starts on a weak beat, you cannot attach them. Okay, but for visual learners like me, I think these diagrams are better. So copy those down in your notebook and memorize the groupings that go with each meter, and you should be okay.